Tens of thousands of people rallied in Turkey's capital on Sunday to protest a court case that could unseat the head of the country's opposition. The Republican People's Party, or CHP, is facing a nearly year-long legal crackdown over allegations of corruption. A court decision on Monday could invalidate the CHP's most recent legislative body. That would in turn reshape the party, likely rattling financial markets and influencing the timing of a general election set for 2028. CHP leader Özgür Özel, who would be ousted by the ruling, spoke to the crowd at Sunday's rally.
This case is political. The accusations are slander. Our comrades are innocent. What's being done is a coup against the future president, against the future government. We will resist, we will resist, we will resist.
The majority-led government says the judiciary is independent and denies political motives for the investigations. It has currently detained more than 500 people, including 17 mayors over the last year in Istanbul and other CHP-run municipalities around the country, as part of corruption investigations, according to a Reuters review. Hundreds of members of the CHP have been jailed pending trial in a sprawling probe into alleged corruption and terrorism links. Among them, President Erdogan's main political rival, Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu. The arrest of İmamoğlu in March sparked the country's largest protest in a decade, where hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets, prompting a brief but sharp sell-off in the lira and other Turkish assets. The CHP plans an extraordinary congress on September 21st as a legal safeguard ahead of Monday's anticipated ruling.
Every political earthquake starts with a tremor, and in Ankara, the tremor came from a courtroom. The spark? A legal case against the Republican People's Party, CHP, Turkey's biggest opposition force. On paper, it's about procedural irregularities in their 2023 Congress. Translation? The government didn't like how the opposition reorganized itself, so now it's trying to hit the undo button in court. Think of it like this. Imagine you hold a student council election, your least favorite kid wins, and instead of accepting it, you run crying to the principal, demanding a do-over. Only this time, the principal is a judiciary that critics say dances to the government's tune. And instead of student council, it's the second largest political party in a NATO member state. Small stakes? Not exactly. If the court rules against the CHP, the entire leadership could collapse. We're talking about nullifying a Congress that produced new leadership, new direction, and renewed energy after years of losing streaks. That would leave the opposition scrambling, leaderless, and vulnerable just in time for President Erdogan's ruling AKP party to tighten its grip further. And here's the kicker. This isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a pattern where Erdogan's government has used courts as a political sledgehammer, whacking rivals whenever they start gaining traction. The CHP's Congress wasn't just an internal meeting. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that Turkish opposition could reorganize and rise again, which is precisely why it's now under attack. But one courtroom squabble doesn't put tens of thousands on the streets. For that, you need something bigger, a pattern of crackdowns that makes people say, enough. And that's where Fact 2 kicks in. If the court case was the spark, the crackdown was the gasoline. Over the past year, more than 500 people connected to the CHP have been detained. And not just random party workers stuffing envelopes, we're talking mayors, 17 of them. Imagine your city mayor being marched out in handcuffs right after fixing potholes and cutting ribbons at playgrounds. That's the reality across Turkey. The government frames these arrests as part of an anti-corruption drive. But the timing? Oh, it's impeccable. Mayors who won big victories against Erdogan's ruling AKP suddenly found themselves accused of misconduct. It's like the universe decided every opposition mayor spontaneously forgot how to keep receipts at the exact same time. Suspicious? You bet. This crackdown sends a chilling message. If you dare to lead against the government, you won't just face criticism, you'll face cuffs. It's a political version of musical chairs where the music never stops because the government controls the stereo. And what's worse, this purge hollows out opposition strongholds like Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir, places where voters made it crystal clear they wanted alternatives. To ordinary Turks, it doesn't look like justice. It looks like the rules of the game being rewritten in real time. That's why when CHP leaders say this is about democracy, not corruption, people listen, because they've watched their chosen leaders disappear faster than free baklava at a bazaar. And if mayors in handcuffs aren't dramatic enough, buckle up, because in Fact 3, we zoom in on one man, Ekrem İmamoğlu, whose arrest shook Turkey to its core. If Erdogan has a political boogeyman, it's Ekrem İmamoğlu. The mayor of Istanbul isn't just another politician. He's the guy who managed to beat Erdogan's AKP in Turkey's biggest city not once, but twice. That made him the golden boy of the opposition and, naturally, public enemy number one for the ruling party. In March, İmamoğlu was arrested. The official charge, insulting public officials and mishandling procedures. The unofficial charge, being too popular for his own good. For Erdogan's critics, this was less about justice and more about removing the one rival who could actually beat him at the ballot box. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted across the country, with Istanbul becoming ground zero. Crowds chanted his name, waved banners, and demanded his release. It was Turkey's largest outpouring of political anger in over a decade, a flashback to the 2013 Gezi Park protests. Only this time, it wasn't about trees. It was about democracy itself. The markets noticed too. The Turkish lira took a nosedive, investors got jittery, and suddenly, Erdogan wasn't just facing angry voters, he was facing angry bankers. Arresting your most popular rival might feel satisfying in the short term, but it's like kicking a hornet's nest. You don't just sting your target, you get swarmed. And yet, İmamoğlu didn't fade into silence. From prison, his voice carried on, becoming a rallying cry for those who saw his arrest as the clearest sign yet that Turkey's democracy was under siege. And that brings us to Fact 4, where İmamoğlu's words, smuggled out of a prison cell, turned a protest into a movement.
You'd think being thrown in prison would silence a politician, but İmamoğlu? He turned his cell into a press office. From behind bars, he sent a handwritten letter that was read aloud at the Ankara protests, and it hit the crowd like a thunderclap. In the letter, İmamoğlu accused Erdogan's government of using the courts to stage what he called a political coup. His warning was blunt. The government wasn't just after him, it was after the very idea of an opposition. And then came the line that would echo through Ankara's streets. The era of I will end, and the era of we will begin. Crowds roared. Protesters waved his face on posters, chanting President İmamoğlu like he was already sworn in. For a man locked in a cell, he sounded more present, more powerful than Erdogan himself. It was the kind of symbolic defiance that dictators dread. Because when your rival speaks louder from a prison bunk than you do from a palace podium, you've got a problem. The government tried to dismiss it as emotional rhetoric, but the damage was done. İmamoğlu's letter didn't just energize the protest, it transformed it. Suddenly, it wasn't just about resisting arrests or court cases, it was about envisioning a future without Erdogan. And when the future of a country gets questioned, the whole world starts to pay attention. That's where Fact 5 comes in. On the surface, Ankara's protests might look like an internal Turkish drama, but zoom out and it's global. Turkey isn't just another country. It's the bridge between Europe and Asia, a NATO heavyweight, and a critical player in everything from refugee deals to energy pipelines. When tens of thousands march in its capital, the world takes notes. First, the markets. Investors treat Turkey like that one cousin who's always borrowing money but never paying it back, a mix of opportunity and constant anxiety. So when Ankara erupted, the lira tumbled, stocks wobbled, and foreign investors started pulling their cash like it was a game of Jenga about to collapse. Second, geopolitics. Turkey controls the key to Europe's refugee crisis and has a military that NATO can't ignore. If Erdogan looks shaky, allies in Brussels and Washington get nervous. Will Turkey drift further towards authoritarianism, or will it swing back toward the pluralism that made it a rising star 2 decades ago? And finally, optics. Erdogan's crackdown doesn't just weaken Turkey's democracy, it sets an example for strongmen everywhere. Leaders in Russia, Hungary, and beyond are watching closely. If Erdogan gets away with jailing rivals and rewriting the rules, it gives them a playbook. But if the protests actually push back, that's a message too. So Ankara isn't just about Turkey, it's a stress test for democracy in a world already wobbling. But Erdogan isn't sitting quietly while the world watches. Fact 6 reveals the line his government is selling and why critics say it's thinner than Turkish tea.
Whenever governments get accused of political crackdowns, they usually pull out the same tired defense. It's not us, it's the courts. And Turkey? Oh, it plays that card like a Vegas pro. Erdogan's officials insist the judiciary is completely independent and that all those arrests, detentions, and Congress annulments are simply the wheels of justice turning. Sounds great on paper. Problem is, the wheels always seem to crush Erdogan's rivals and never, say, his buddies. Funny coincidence, huh? Here's the pattern. When an opposition figure wins big, a lawsuit follows. When a mayor challenges the AKP narrative, suddenly there's a corruption probe. When the CHP organizes itself into a credible force, poof, procedural irregularities. If this is independence, then Mike Goldfish has a shot at becoming the next Supreme Court chief. Critics inside and outside Turkey see through it. International watchdogs like Human Rights Watch and the EU Parliament have been warning for years that Turkey's courts look less like referees and more like teammates wearing Erdogan's jersey. Still, the government clings to the narrative. Because if you admit the courts are political, you admit democracy is hollow. And for Erdogan, image is everything. But courtrooms aren't where democracy is decided anymore. In Turkey, the real battle is spilling into the streets. And that's where Fact 7 cranks up the volume. If the courtroom was the spark and İmamoğlu's letter the gasoline, then Ankara's streets became the explosion. Tens of thousands of protesters poured into the capital, waving Turkish flags, chanting Erdogan's resignation, and singing opposition songs loud enough to drown out car horns. It wasn't a polite march. It was visceral, electric, like the city itself had turned into a giant amplifier for frustration. Picture it, streets packed wall to wall, red flags fluttering like a storm of fire, chants rolling like thunder down boulevards. You could practically feel the ground vibrating. And the pressure wasn't just emotional, it was political. Ankara isn't some small outpost. It's the beating heart of Turkey's state machinery. When people fill those streets, it's not just a protest, it's a warning shot. We're not afraid of your institutions, because we'll take it straight to the doorstep of power. The government tried to downplay it, calling protesters misguided and influenced by foreign agendas, classic playbook, but the visuals told a different story. Ordinary Turks, families, students, retirees, all standing shoulder to shoulder, not radicals, not extremists, citizens saying enough is enough. Think of it as a pressure cooker. Years of restrictions, arrests, and silencing building up steam. The Ankara rally, that was the whistle screaming. And protests don't scream without a purpose. In Fact 8, we'll look at the demands that lit up the rally and why they strike at the heart of Erdogan's grip on power.
When crowds fill the streets, they don't just want to wave flags and chant. They want demands. And the loudest one in Ankara? Snap elections. Özgür Özel, the new leader of the CHP, took the stage and went full rally mode. No timid phrases, no careful diplomacy. His line was pure fire. We will resist. We will resist. We will resist. And the crowd chanted it back like a drumbeat. For a party accused of being paralyzed for years, this was the sound of defiance finally cracking the silence. Why snap elections? Because the opposition knows the game is being rigged right now. If Erdogan's government dismantles the CHP's leadership structure, then by 2028, the opposition could be too disorganized to mount a real challenge. A snap election would throw a wrench in that plan, forcing Erdogan to face voters before his legal maneuvers can neuter his rivals. It's risky. Erdogan is still powerful, still controls much of the media, and still has a loyal base. But as the crowd made clear, waiting quietly until 2028 is a slow death sentence. Snap elections represent urgency, momentum, and a refusal to let the government drag out its dominance unchecked. And with chants echoing across Ankara, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a protest anymore. It was a declaration. But declarations mean little without timelines. And Fact 9 shows why 2028 looms like a storm cloud over Turkey's political horizon. If Turkey's politics were a chess game, 2028 is the checkmate square. That's when the next general election is scheduled, and everything happening now is about who controls the board when that moment arrives. For Erdogan, dragging things out until 2028 works perfectly. The longer the timeline, the more opportunities to sideline rivals, weaken the CHP, and control the narrative. By the time ballots are cast, the opposition could be so fractured that it doesn't matter how unpopular he is, he'd still win by default. But for the opposition, though, 2028 looks like a mirage. If they can't protect their leadership structure today, there won't be a real opposition tomorrow. That's why Imamoglu's arrest, the crackdown on mayors, and the courtroom games all matter so much. They're not about now. They're about setting the stage for a 2028 election with only one real contender left standing. And the stakes aren't just national. International allies are watching, wondering if Turkey will remain a partner in NATO or slide further into authoritarianism. Investors are calculating whether Turkey in 2028 is stable enough to bet on or too volatile to touch. So 2028 isn't just a date on the calendar. It's the finish line of a marathon that started years ago. And every protest, every arrest, every rally is a sprint to make sure democracy makes it across intact. Which leads us to the big one, fact number 10, because this fight isn't just Turkey's headache. It's democracy itself on trial.
Strip away the noise, the court cases, the arrests, the protests, even Imamoglu's prison letter, and what you're left with is a single, uncomfortable truth. Turkey's democracy is on trial, and the verdict will shape not just one nation, but the political climate of an entire region. This isn't the first time Turkey has danced on the edge between pluralism and authoritarianism. From coups in the past to Erdogan's tightening grip today, the country has always been a political balancing act. But this moment feels different. The arrests are bigger, the protests are louder, and the stakes? They're global. Because Turkey isn't some isolated player, it's NATO's second largest army. It's the gatekeeper of millions of refugees bound for Europe. It's the middleman in energy pipelines that keep lights on from Athens to Berlin. If democracy cracks here, the tremors will be felt from Washington to Brussels. That's why Ankara's protests matter. They're not just citizens shouting at government buildings, they're a stress test, a check on how much pressure a democracy can endure before collapsing into one-man rule. And maybe that's why the images from Ankara feel so powerful. Flags, chants, ordinary people refusing to stay quiet. Because at its core, democracy isn't defended in courtrooms. It's defended in streets, in voices, and in the refusal to let silence win. Which brings us to the big question. Will those voices be enough? So here we are. Tens of thousands have marched in Ankara, Imamoglu's words are echoing from prison, and the world is watching a democracy fight for its pulse. Turkey's ruling party insists this is all justice. The opposition calls it a political coup. And stuck in the middle are millions of ordinary citizens who just want fair elections and a government that respects the rules instead of rewriting them. But here's the bigger question. Is this just another chapter in Turkey's long political roller coaster? Or are we witnessing the beginning of the end for Erdogan's two-decade dominance? Could the cracks in his system finally widen into a break? Or will the government's iron grip crush this momentum before it can reshape the future? One thing's certain, Ankara's protests aren't just about Turkey. They're a reminder that democracy anywhere, fragile, noisy, chaotic democracy,
depends on people willing to stand up, wave flags, and shout until power is forced to listen. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Are these protests a genuine turning point, or just another flare-up in Turkey's endless cycle of drama? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if you found this breakdown useful, hit that like button, subscribe to @GlobalPulseNews, and share this with someone who needs to understand why what happens in Ankara could shake the world. Because when tens of thousands take to the streets, the world doesn't just watch. The world listens.